You're listening to a Frequency Podcast Network production.
He's in the building!
Drink the moment. Drink it.
I said empty your mind.
Coquettish and coy. Ow. Ow.
What?
Yeah, there's people that are dying.
The wickedly talented.
More than great. It was historic.
Crack is world.
Oh, good for you.
I have to apologize.
One of the hottest.
Welcome back to The Reheat, a podcast that re-examines the hottest celebrity news and scandals of yesteryear and asks, how would we react to the same events if they'd transpired today? I'm your co-host, Sarah Sahagian.
And I'm Steph Hassan, your other co-host. And in today's episode, we're going to take a look at how certain events in the media can often get a little skewed through the lens of social media. And how we're going to do that is by focusing on a few recent events that have many questioning, have we arrived at the end of the Me Too movement? I hope not, but we'll see. As a warning, this episode will contain discussions of intimate partner violence and emotional abuse. If the subject matter is too triggering, please take care of your mental health and consider listening to one of our other episodes instead. Now, to help Sarah and I dig into this, we are joined by two very special guests, Gillian Berner and Cailyn Michaan, the hosts of Teach Me How to Adult, a podcast that we know you love if you love ours, and which you can also find on the Frequency Podcast Network. On their show, they talk all about how to navigate adulthood and educate ourselves on all the important issues we were never taught growing up. With over 10 years of experience working in the media and entertainment industry, they are passionate about empowering women to become the best versions of themselves. So naturally, they felt like the right people to help us wade through this week's topics. Ladies, tell us about yourselves.
Hi, thank you so much for having us. We're so excited to be here and chat with you both. I'm Cailyn. As you said, Jill and I have both worked in the media and entertainment industry for over 10 years. Currently, I work at Disney in media and experiential marketing. And I'm a new mama to a 6-month-old who is probably the hardest job I've ever had in my life, which I'm sure you can attest to too. So it's tough, but we're so excited and can't wait to dive into this juicy convo with you two.
Yeah, we're really excited to be here. Thanks for having us.
Of course.
Thank you for coming.
Now, listen, we've got a lot to dig into, but before we do, I want to ask all of you, including you, Sarah, have any of you run into any examples of how what's going on in the world can often be twisted in the news and social media?
Yeah, there are a lot of them. And I know today we're talking about the Amber Heard and Johnny Depp trial in some of these, in some of this analysis. And I've had some run-ins. There is a woman on Twitter who said that if I felt like Amber Heard was a victim of abuse, then I must be lying about my own history of sexual abuse.
Oh boy.
So people are really fired up about this issue, and it's causing them to be their worst selves on social media and to doubt other women. So it could be the end of Me Too, unfortunately, if people are using their belief that Amber Heard is a liar, which they are basing simply on the fact that they don't trust her expressions to discredit other women who are survivors.
Yeah.
Where is the hope for the world?
Agreed. It's kind of like throwing it back to that whole Aziz Ansari scandal that happened like many, many years ago when the Me Too movement just kind of got like really polluted with the idea of like if someone has a bad date or someone doesn't like how things are going and then they speak out and then other people don't agree, then all of a sudden there's no legs to the Me Too movement and everyone's just going to shit on it, which is problematic. So it just seems like people are just always looking for arsenal as to like why it should be discredited as a movement. And this is the latest example.
Absolutely. And I mean, the way that I like to put it, Sarah, is that a lot of people are showing their asses right now, right? I mean, I have learned a lot about people that I thought that I knew and that I can no longer know and call friends. So let's dig a little deeper into this particular example because it really is the best one. So we've got the trial between Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. There is, frankly, no better way to describe it than a shit show. First, in order to understand the nitty-gritty of it all, let's do a quick summary of what has led us to today's predicaments. These two met way back on the set of the very bad 2011 movie, The Rum Diary, in my personal opinion. It was just as her star was rising and his was sinking. The two started dating soon after, married in 2015, and split just over a year later, with Amber filing for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences, and filing a temporary restraining order with allegations of domestic abuse. abuse. In court documents responding to her filing, Johnny's lawyer suggested she was, quote, attempting to secure a premature financial resolution by alleging abuse. In other words, she was kind of blackmailing him for money. Nevertheless, a few months later, they managed to reach a $7 million divorce settlement, with Amber committing to donating that entire amount to domestic violence and children's charities. Later that year, just before the Me Too movement kicked off, Amber wrote a powerful essay for Port magazine addressed to her, quote, silent sisters everywhere. In it, without ever mentioning Johnny, she described how difficult it can be for women experiencing domestic violence and in choosing to speak up about it. What would follow was, in her own words, a blacklisting. So Amber started losing a ton of roles, including Aquaman, most notably. She got tons of death threats. She was also let go from a massive fashion brand's 2-year campaign. As for Johnny, he just kept booking roles. He was fine. He was doing great. Here's a clip of Amber reading her story at the Incredible Women Gala in 2018.
To my silent sisters, you are not alone. Many of you have suffered alone behind closed doors, but you are not alone. You need to know that. I want to remind you of your strength. It's a strength that is multiplied by the countless number of women who stand silently behind you. This is a truth that allowed me to break down the doors I once found myself behind.
2018, 2 years later, after her Porter essay, Amber wrote a now infamous follow-up op-ed for the Washington Post. In it, she wrote about experiencing abuse from a young age, coming to discover patriarchy and the power men hold, and, quote, feeling the full force of our culture's wrath for women who speak out. Months later, in 2019, Johnny sued his now ex-wife for defamation for that Washington Post story, claiming she had created, quote, an elaborate hoax to generate positive publicity in order to advance her career. Okay, Johnny. That is the trial we are now witnessing. It began in April and came to a close in late May with endless dirty laundry for the public to sort through. In response, Amber countersued Johnny for $100 million for creating a smear campaign against her. This, by the way, is after a libel case Johnny took out against the British tabloid The Sun in 2020 for calling him a, quote, wife beater. And I really want everyone listening to remember this fact above anything, because I feel like it's kind of been forgotten in all the noise. Johnny lost that case because the judge found that he had no evidence to suggest he wasn't abusive and that referring to him as a wife beater was, quote, substantially true. So before we dive into the trial itself and how this entire situation has been broadcast and devoured endlessly by the public, what do we make of what has transpired between these two? Because I feel like if we look at the bare facts, keeping all theater and opinion out of it, it seems pretty black and white, doesn't it? What do you guys think?
Do you think it's black and white? I don't know. It doesn't seem that black and white. It seems like a shit show because they both are problematic in their own right. I mean, again, I'm not an expert in the subject matter, so I'm only speaking through the lens of like what I've seen, cropping up on social. And like, I always, as a former magazine editor, do a bit of fact checking, but I haven't dived all the way in. But she has a history of violence against her ex-partners, and he obviously has a lot of issues as well. They both are really problematic. They both have mental health issues, substance abuse issues, and they both have a history of jealous behavior and of, in Amber's case, abusive behavior. I'm not sure if Johnny's behavior has been proven to be abusive in his past relationships, but it seems really complicated to me. It seems like these are two people who are probably both victims and perpetrators in their own way.
Just to jump in there, Johnny has been abusive in past relationships. Elm Barkin testified that he hit her when they were together. So we do know that he has a history of violence.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, I think complicated is the right thing. I mean, Gillian, you put it really well. When I read the facts about it, and we'll get into more of it in a bit, but they both do seem to be abusers. But I think what's interesting is the way that the media is picking it up is like you have to pick a side. But when you just hear these bare facts, it's kind of your standard abuse case. I mean, it really is. Just looking at these bare facts and also knowing what the final verdict was in the original trial with The Sun, having Johnny been called an actual abuser with evidence, we know we have that going into this one, right? So it's like we're also armed with those facts. There's a lot there that I think we can go in feeling like we're very armed to understand what the situation is. What do you think, Cailyn?
I think so. I mean, it is a complicated situation because I didn't know about that son case. Like what sparked that comment of calling him a wife beater? What was the relationship that it's referring to, the Amber Heard relationship?
Yeah. So this was when, I mean, since they've been together since 2016, there's been a lot of rumors flying. You know, these two have been in the tabloids for years since they got together. And a lot of it was them mutually hurling not really great comments about each other and what their relationship was like. And so there was also audio recordings out there of the way that they would argue. And so there was a headline in The Sun on the cover calling him a wife beater in his relationship with Amber Heard. And he took issue with that.
Yeah. I mean, it's quite obvious. You can't argue that her career has deteriorated significantly more than his has. I mean, he's kind of looked at as like America's sweetheart right now, just with the ridiculous portrayal of everything when really neither party is quite innocent. So I don't know. It's hard. It's hard to form a concrete opinion. Again, I'm just learning as we go. You're helping me adult on this situation here. So I appreciate the facts.
Well, this is great. I mean, this is the way we're breaking this down right now is the way I hope most people will do it. You know, just looking at the facts, looking at the timeline, taking opinion out of it. So speaking of which, let's look at more of the details. So key factor in the way what's happening between these two has become distorted in the media is understanding the facts. So we've gone over the timeline. Let's go over the evidence, which is not quite as complicated as some might have you believe. So Amber alleges that Johnny is physically and emotionally abusive. She said that there was a time during the relationship when he accused her of, excuse me for getting into this, but shitting in their bed to get back at him for an argument they'd had. But she says it was their dog who did this, something that happened often, which she had proof of in old texts. And besides, Johnny wasn't even sleeping in the house that night. He was scheduled to be at another property, which makes this whole story really convoluted. And I bring this incident up because it led to him accusing her denying it, and him then allegedly throwing his phone at her in anger. So she took photos of her face to show the bruising, and there is metadata in the photography that shows the time and the date and confirms it. Her friends too, who she contacted after the incident itself, have vouched for it, and there's text messages for all of that as well. Johnny even texted her days later to apologize for what happened. So it all makes this, you know, again, a little more black and white, I think. Johnny, meanwhile, has said she photoshopped these and convinced her friends to lie for her. Even the UK judge was not on Johnny's side for this. And there's video of him smashing cabinets while arguing with her, audio of him emotionally berating her. There's also that infamous text of him saying to Paul Bettany, of all people, that he wants to kill Amber and have sex with her corpse to make sure she's dead, which is not so great for Paul either. Johnny's also admitted to headbutting Amber, though he said that was an accident. Now, for his part, Johnny has also accused Amber of physically and emotionally abusing him, including saying that she once punched him in the face after learning he owed millions in unpaid taxes. So there are many audio recordings of Amber berating Johnny too, and also admitting to hitting him and saying no one would believe him if he claimed to be a domestic violence victim, which is a really tough bit to hear. Security guards and other members of their team have said they've seen her abuse him, while their marital counselor testified they engaged in mutual abuse. And as Gillian and Sarah mentioned, both of these two have a history of abuse mentioned by former partners. So what I want to get into is, why is the concept of mutual abuse so tough for people to wrap their heads around? Why does there have to be a side?
Yeah, that's a hard one. I feel like society is just so used to a one-way abusive relationship, and it's typically a man abusing a woman, and it's just what we're used to. It's like socially makes sense to most people. I think people can't wrap their heads around a man being abused by a woman, because we all raise boys to be strong and, you know, not show any weakness. So it's just odd for a man to come out and say he's abused. And I just think it's really maybe uncomfortable for some people to hear and see and accept. But I mean, we've all said it. You've read the facts. There's obviously mutual abuse going on here, and not sure where it started or who started it, but either way, there's something really wrong. Something really wrong here, friends.
I think it's also just this like storytelling trope that's existed since the beginning of stories, that there's always good versus bad, like good and evil. And like, obviously, as we know from the history books, that all depends on who's telling the story. But like every narrative always pits one against the other, and there has to be this polarization of good versus bad. And so I think a lot of people think of it as a cop-out, but my only opinion that I've had of this entire case is that they're both fucked up. And people are like, no, but what do you really think? Like, they want you to choose. Like, everybody wants you to choose a side and choose who's good and who's bad. And that's the thing. Like, these cases, and I'm sure a lot of domestic cases, are really a mutually destructive situation that there's two victims often and two perpetrators often.
So what I find interesting about this case is how people on social media, so many, have been so quick to think that because there is some audio and there is some evidence that Amber may have been violent with Johnny, that means he wasn't violent with her, even though we also have evidence of that, right? People seem to throw away that evidence and discredit it for no reason and believe him. And it really shows you that you have, I mean, there's male privilege here. People are more likely to believe men. Men have more credibility in our society because of sexism, because I think under patriarchy, we want to believe that women are liars, right? We want to take the man's side. We want to trust men. And also, he's beloved and famous and has the privilege of money and of being higher profile than she is. I mean, he's an Oscar-nominated actor who's been in one of the most popular film franchises of the last few decades. He's had countless iconic roles. I mean, the man's Edward Scissorhands. And because he is this icon. I mean, who's more beloved than Edward Scissorhands? At least in my home.
I love him too. Although, can I just say, he definitely believes he is Jack Sparrow. Like, that man is living that life. And that's part of the problem.
He thinks he's a pirate. No, but because he has this position of privilege, people seem to think that he couldn't beat his wife. And we know that the more powerful a man is, that doesn't make him more likely to be nice. Like, I can think of a lot of really famous, powerful men who aren't nice people.
Yeah, I think you're so right. And Gillian, I love the comment that you made about this being like a storytelling trope. And let's not forget, because they're movie stars, we're naturally inclined to look at one of them as like the predator or the villain or the victim or the good person or whatever the hell. And Johnny especially has been playing heroes since I was a kid. So like, I'm primed to see him that way. And by the way, I was his biggest fan when I was younger. And so it's interesting.
I was obsessed with him.
Yeah. And I feel like for our generation, right, he was that guy. And so for me, it was him and Winona Ryder. So
Yeah. But people want to hate Amber so much, which is so sad. Like, they really want to hate her. And that's, I think, I mean, I'm sure we'll get into this later, but I think that's a really gross part for me that has emerged. These are obviously, like, we're seeing the worst moments of these two people's lives, like literally the worst moments, the most just treacherous things that have happened to them being aired out for the world to see. And it's being met with just a villainization of only one of them, which I think is really sad and hard and feeds into the idea that, like, women are crazy and that, like, she's obviously crazy. She's batshit crazy. And of course she did this. Whereas he's, a beloved movie star.
No one wants to believe that this beautiful man that everyone probably had posters up in their room as kids could do something so terrible. And they just don't want to believe it. And that's what's kind of probably fueling a lot of these crazy TikTok memes and all that stupid shit that we're seeing on social media.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you brought it up, Cailyn. So let's get into that. There is a very ungodly way the internet has chosen to, for lack of a better term, examine this trial. TikTok, I think it's fair to say, has been an especially frightening place to be. If you ever spend even 20 minutes, probably even 5 minutes, honestly, on this app at this point, you're likely to run into a video or 2 or 10 where young TikTokers express their feelings about the trial as if it's all just some fun fan fiction. The extreme majority view Amber as a gold-digging, brainless harlot who attempted to take Johnny for all he was worth, while Johnny is, to quote, an innocent little boy who just needed help but was eaten alive by the evil woman and could never have hurt her, much less a fly. Now, there are videos where these users will reenact moments of abuse Amber has shared as if to disprove her. There are videos where they'll ship Johnny and his lawyer. There are montages set to music worthy of a hero of Johnny sitting in court waiting to be vindicated. Even a makeup brand joined the chorus just to contradict the way Amber's lawyer said she used their product to cover cover her bruises. That's insane. Even my precious Lance Bass has done his own reenactment video. God damn it, Lance. No one is safe. Apparently, professional lawyers, psychologists, professors have even been confident enough to broadcast these same views on TikTok with little remorse or afterthought. Hashtags were born. There was Amber Turd, Me Poo. Right now, the hashtag Amber Heard Sucks has 3 million views, while Amber Heard Bitch has 1.3 million. TikTokers even started a rumor that she killed her own mother several years ago and have pushed the claim that she's been plagiarizing popular novels as part of her testimony. And these have become to be believed as facts by many. And then there's the belief that Johnny is sending them secret signals in his testimony. And I can't stop thinking of the moment Amber just wipes her nose and fans turned it into a conspiracy theory that she was really sneaking a bump of cocaine, which is absurd. And then there's like the endless memes. The same content can be found on Twitter and Instagram and just about anywhere else. Saturday Night Live even did a whole sketch around it, again portraying Amber as a joke and Johnny as a sweetheart. Here's a little clip.
Mr. Depp, earlier in this trial, you mentioned that Miss Heard left fecal matter in your bed.
That is correct. Yes.
And how did that make you feel?
I felt very, very sad.
Objection, Your Honor, we've been through this. There's no actual proof that this ever happened.
Sustained. Where are you going with this, counselor?
Well, Your Honor, we've recently found surveillance footage of the House staff discovering the alleged fecal matter on Mr. Depp's bed.
Oh, word?
Objection! That still wouldn't prove my client is guilty of anything.
That's true, but I'll allow it because it does sound fun, and this trial is for fun.
And Chris Rock, too, having learned little from the Will Smith slap, has said, quote, believe all women except Amber Heard. And in 2020, Bot Sentinel, a group that examines social media campaigns, found that there are hundreds of fake Twitter accounts solely dedicated to defaming Amber and demanding she be fired from all acting and modeling jobs. It is scary out there. And if you're wondering just how this trial became so accessible, first of all, it's being streamed via Court TV, and there are so many TikTok accounts dedicated to just that stream. So-called fans will watch it day to day as if it's the World Cup or a Big Brother late night stream, which is something I would do, maybe not everybody. They're even parked outside the courthouse and surround his car asking for autographs when he arrives each day. This is ridiculous. And because Johnny and Amber are celebrities whose story has been in the news since they got together, the idea that they should be afforded any sense of privacy has long been out the door. They, by the way, are also actors, like we talked about, who are very aware of the fact that they are being broadcast to the world. So I think they kind of also know what they're doing, keeping in mind that the people are watching. So, you know, it all feels like a movie, and frankly, why shouldn't it? Now, here's my thing. This is active disinformation, and seems like everyone is picking up on it just because they know it's popular rather than factual. So I want to ask you guys, how do we figure out what's right from wrong? How do we parse this information?
Just shut down your phone. No, I'm kidding. I don't know. Can I ask you a question off the top?
Yeah.
You mentioned, so it's streamed through Court TV. Why is this case so public? Like, why do they have to agree to doing this?
I'm not sure if they have to agree to it, but for the most part, a lot of trials are public. This one is being picked up because everybody wants to see it, so we're aware of it. But that's interesting too. Not a lot of people are aware that just because trials are considered something that should be held to public accountability, that a lot of them are available and you can go watch them if you want to. But this one, we all want to apparently, so it's out there.
I think from what I've looked into it, the judge gets the final say based on the state that you're in as to whether it becomes public in terms of public recordings. And usually in criminal cases, they don't make it public, but because this is like a defamation case and not like the case isn't actually about the abuse, it's about the like libel against calling him an abuser. So that's like a loophole, I guess, as to why it's become public, but don't quote me on it.
And it's the first time I can remember since the O.J. Simpson trial that people have been watching in this in like large numbers like this and treating it like daytime TV, which a ton of people have done. But now, because of social media, it's all the grossness that I'm sure was present when people watched the O.J. Simpson trial and had their own commentaries is amplified and shared with the world. So it really broadcasts everybody's pet theories, which are often quite problematic. Like, can you imagine what we would have seen if the O.J. Simpson trial had been televised in the age of social media?
And I think what's scary too is the way that the algorithms work on TikTok and Instagram is the more content you consume, the more type of that content you're going to get served up to. So if you are consuming content with that hashtag, all those crazy Amber Heard hashtags, like you're going to get more of that Johnny side of the story. So it's not accurate information. You're not getting both sides, which is what's sad.
It creates a vacuum of confirmation bias, which is really what social media has done.
Exactly.
And it's also, I think it's because I love consuming my news through video. So I've always just been such a big fan of that medium. And now I'm seeing like the scary side of it, which is how the court proceedings are being edited falsely. And it's like really pissing me off because we all see the exact same footage of Johnny laughing at one instance that occurred in court being now used for everything. Like he's laughing at the lawyer, he's laughing at Amber, he's laughing. And and people are just believing it because they either don't know any better, they don't care, they are not aware of how this is happening. So I think the best advice I could give from the media world is to just try to only consume coverage that's coming from official networks and people who actually cover, courts, news outlets, because everything else is like basically fan fiction being created out of the court proceedings. And if in doubt, what I've done super late at night when I can't sleep is like actually ashamed to admit this, but watched the YouTube video, like the full YouTube video of that section of the case, because then you see the reactions and most of them are being taken out of context. And when you watch the entire thing, that's the only way to know what's true.
Absolutely. I think that's really important advice. And I don't want to shame anyone who likes to get their news from social media, but it's one of those things where you can do both. You can see what's trending on social media and then go to a news website that has editors and fact checkers to see if that's true. So if I see something that I find interesting on social media, then I'll go to the CBC or the BBC or the Guardian or the Globe and Mail and see how they're covering the story. And it's not that they always get everything right, but when they get something wrong, they typically retract. So there's a little bit more accountability and there's a little bit more of an incentive to get it right than your average TikToker has.
100%.
Newsweek, for example, is doing an active fact check of the trial, and you can rely on them because that is an established news organization. And I mean, Gillian mentioned watching like a bit of the trial itself. Listen, it's not that exciting. It moves very slowly. It's so dry.
It's so shocking. I've never watched like raw footage of a trial, and oh my god, like this is not Suits, people.
It's not
like,
the good way.
Straight up waiting 5 minutes for them to shuffle through their notes.
I know. Where is Christine Baranski? I'm like, this is not as interesting as an episode of The Good Fight.
Wait, because eventually a season of American Crime Story is gonna come, and our Queen Christine will be in there. I have to assume.
Oh, for sure, for sure. The Good Wife will also do a ripoff of this, which I love it when they take things from the headlines. I mean, not The Good Wife, The Good Fight. So, I mean, it will be dramatized and probably be more interesting. But I do think it's important that we have the discussion that this is inspiring. I just am sad that so many people have used this as an excuse to disbelieve women and say that Me Too is bullshit and that if women allege abuse, they're usually liars, which we know statistically it is very rare for a woman to make up abuse claims, because even when your abuse claims are true, people doubt you and it's hardly worth it to come forward, basically, with the way you're received in society. So it's quite disheartening to realize that most people, at least not most people, but a lot of people were just waiting for an opportunity like this to try to end the Me Too movement.
That's what it feels like. Like a joke that Chris Rock made. If he made that at the peak of Me Too, he would have been eaten alive. But him making it now, not even, I could mention it to anybody. Most people don't even know he said what he said. People are just fixated on the slap still. It's like we've moved on from that. He's done other shit. But like, it's just sad. It's all kind of being buried. And that's also because it's popular. And that's, I think, a big thing I would love for people to remember. Just because something is popular doesn't mean it's true. What's making people laugh is not necessarily reality. late night hosts especially are going to jump on this shit and take it and tear it apart. But what's sad is people will hear it and they believe that as truth because that just keeps getting repeated. It's this really sad broken telephone. Now, before we get a little deeper into the world of TikTok and disinformation, let's take a quick break. We will be right back. So what I find especially interesting is that the majority of those so-called fans who've been spinning these tales are Gen Z, the same generation who are more forward-thinking than any other, who have been at the forefront of Black Lives Matter, of women's marches, you name it. They are the bulk of users on TikTok and also the bulk of fans playing armchair detective, trying to prove Amber wrong and Johnny victorious, all while still claiming to be feminists and fans. But there's no denying the sexism and the paranoia is thick, and we've seen it before with fans of celebrity men. Take, for instance, and I don't know if you guys have seen this, I've seen too much of it, but the way Harry Styles fans have taken to tearing apart Olivia Wilde, who they've nicknamed Olive Oil on TikTok, which I don't get.
What?
As someone who loves olive oil also, is that an insult?
That's a compliment. That is a compliment.
I think so.
Way to be the best condiment on a salad.
Honestly, yeah. And then there's the way Benedict Cumberbatch fans, who, by the way, call themselves Cumberbitches, which is like, your first red flag. They began to believe his wife, Sophie Hunter, was part of a crime ring and faked her pregnancies, destroying the poor man's life. I mean, it's ridiculous. And I'm just
people
scratching
okay?
the surface.
Like, is everyone okay right now?
No, they are not.
People love these conspiracy theories about pregnancy. And here's what I have to say. Like, first of all, I don't believe she faked her pregnancies, and I don't believe she's destroying Benedict Cumberbatch's life. But if people do want to fake their pregnancies and give birth via surrogate or adopt, pretend that they gave birth biologically, as long as they are telling the truth to their children who, because I feel like we should be transparent with our children in the long run, I don't give a shit. It is not our business. Like, honestly, It is not my business if this woman was pregnant or not. Why are we so fascinated with women's wombs?
That's a whole other episode, Sarah.
Well, but I think there is such a common thread here because it is us stepping in other people's business and also the toughest part of it, right? That's what fans tend to do. Like, they will grab the most traumatic, the most tough, the most difficult thing, and then they'll harp on this woman for it. And we'll dig into the misogyny a little bit. First, I want to mention The Atlantic had a great story by Caitlyn Tiffany recently, and she described this phenomenon as anti-fandom, which she learned can be as deeply emotional as fandom, which is a little scary, and something millennials are especially familiar with. So she writes, quote, "These fans, who are also anti-fans, subject the women they hate to body shaming and wild criminal accusations and skewer them using sexist tropes. The targets of their anti-fandom are manipulative and ambitious, and as a rule, also stupid. They are glamorous and seductive, but also secretly disgusting. Ultimately," she says, "what is created is a, quote, community of denigration." So this is exactly what we're seeing happen to Amber Heard. And I think we can ascertain two things that are happening here. So there's the parasocial relationships that have become stronger than ever, as is the idea of what makes a quote unquote good victim, which typically when it comes to women does not look like a blonde bombshell like Amber Heard. She is also a person who does not have a legion and generation of fans like Johnny. So he's got like a fucking army of people who have been waiting for years to back him up. She does not have the same thing. She has people who are more of the anti-fan ready to go. So I want to talk about that. I mean, specifically Gen Z, which again is a generation of young activists. But then there's this. I mean, how do we explain these two things together?
Well, I think that, listen, celebrity is odd, and I do understand the reaction to want to make celebrity less important, right? I do understand the idea of wanting to critique celebrities when they mess up, but this is very different from that because even if you believe that Amber Heard was an abuser and this was mutual abuse, which many people do, and there is, a lot of evidence of that, that doesn't mean she wasn't abused, right? So this taking of a woman deciding that her abuse doesn't matter, that we are going to make her the liar, we are going to mock her, we're going to burn her in effigy, is fascinating and horrible. But the truth is it's not so different from what used to happen when we were growing up. Remember, we took women like Monica Lewinsky, a woman who had this relationship with her boss where he had the power. She didn't. Yeah. There was this power imbalance. And we made her the pariah. We made her the scapegoat. So women are often the scapegoats for men who mess up, powerful men who mess up. And that's how patriarchy maintains order. When men mess up, we find a woman to blame, right? Who was blamed for Bill Clinton? It was Monica for being, quote, slutty and a stalker and crazy. Yeah. And Hillary for, being frigid. She wasn't a loving enough wife. Not him for having sex with an intern, right? Like that, and his decisions. So this, the anti-fan thing is part of a long history of misogyny. And that's what I wish that these particular, I know many very woke Gen Z people who, who would never make TikToks about Amber Heard the way some people do. But anybody who's making a TikTok where you vilify her and you make her the scapegoat, realize that it's hard to do that and call yourself a feminist, because this is part of a long history of blaming women for situations where they're often the victim. And if they're not the victim, it was a mutual situation.
Yeah. I mean, I think part of it too is that Gen Z has a ton of social media. We did not have that when we were growing up, right? Like, no, I could love Johnny Depp in innocent peace. I would have never known any of this shit. And I could live naively like I wanted to. And so that amplifies a lot of this, and it becomes like a hive mind, and they say their shit to each other and everyone echoes it back. And also, and maybe I'm being unfair, but they're still, to me, kids, and they're young and they're immature, right?
Yeah,
and this is the age where you read fan fiction and you ship people and like you fall in love with celebrities as if they are your next door neighbors. So again, going back to parasocial relationships, you get so attached. And when you also have that celebrity's Instagram to look at every day, you get even more attached because they feel like someone you really know. So I think there's that. And so both things can be true. This generation can be filled with these amazing, amazing activists who also are maybe confused and who I think maybe should pick up a book. That's what I would really like. Like, read a newspaper, go read a website. It doesn't even have to be a fucking paper in your hands. And I think that's something that's really unfortunate. I think most of this generation really does get their news from TikTok, and that's really unfortunate.
Here's the thing. I know I would have said things that were super stupid if I had TikTok and Instagram when I was their age. So I have so much empathy. I don't want to say like they are somehow a defective generation. I think they're so smart. But you're right. Their brains aren't fully developed. Your brain develops until you're 25 or 30. So we should almost save these people for themselves by saying don't have TikTok until you're 35 and jaded and what's what.
It's true.
Maybe. Jaded. Honestly, the extent of my fandom when I was little was my very first email address was Hillary_Duff_lover.
Oh, cute.
And so sweet. But looking back at it, I'm like, that's fucking creepy, Cailyn. Like, why was that your email address?
It's not creepy. It's sweet.
I was just an innocent little nugget compared to what's going on these days. It's alarming.
But interestingly, I think that fandom has turned into almost maybe a desensitization. This might be a bit of a Pollyannish way of looking at it. But I wonder if Gen Z or Z, depending on where you live, they're very empathetic to the everyday people. They're marching for their peers and for themselves and for movements that they believe in. And then they're so desensitized to celebrity that they forget that these are humans and these are people. And this isn't just a reality TV show that's been orchestrated by producers. This is someone's fucking life.
Yes.
And so I think the fandom that we had where we put them on a pedestal and we're loved these celebrities, it's now become this the young people think they just have a right to people's personal lives and personal information and to be able to just fuck with it.
Good point.
Yeah, I'm with you, Gillian. Yeah. This is one of those instances where I think we're all proud to just age ourselves a little bit. Sorry. Not to be
sorry, I'm a millennial. I don't really
take
know.
my middle part and my high jeans and
yeah, exactly. Jill, to your point, that's the thing. These are people's lives and we're witnessing the worst part of their lives publicly. And I just keep thinking about what's going to happen to them when this trial is over, because the world will go on and there'll be a news story that everyone's going to pick up on. And whatever the verdict is on this case, they're both probably not going to be able to work again. And their mental health, I can only imagine what's going to happen, especially Amber Heard right now. So it's a sad.
Yeah.
It's sad. there's no winners.
I would wager that he'll work again and she won't. I think our society...
I would too.
Yeah,
I think based on patterns, right? Based on history.
Our society is misogynistic enough that I think that he will be forgiven. A lot of people don't want to believe this about him. And Hollywood cares about making money. So once the memory of this has faded, someone's going to cast it. I mean, there were already rumors of him, not even rumors, the story of him beating Amber Heard was out when he was in Fantastic Beasts. And, you know, everyone was okay with that. So I think he will continue to work. And even if he doesn't, he's so rich that it doesn't matter. He won't suffer.
Yeah. And hey, every celebrity always has a book in them. And I'm sure he's going to find a good ghostwriter. And I have to point to the fact that, again, this is a pattern, and especially in Hollywood. So the one that I've been going back to a lot lately is William Hurt, who passed away earlier this year, but who was in the memoriam and received a massive applause at the Oscars this year, and who has been beloved for a very, very long time, and who I would even say is on par with Johnny in terms of Hollywood accolades and the same kind of breadth of film. And he is an abuser. He's a known abuser. Marlee Matlin has talked about it. She's talked about it for years. She was at the same Oscar ceremony, for fuck's sake. And like nobody acknowledged it. So, and she's not somebody who has had regular work. I mean, that's also for other reasons, I think. But the fact that we don't even remember what she said, and she said it years ago, that's common. We've seen it. And Johnny is somebody who
celebrated Woody Allen forever.
Oh, great example. Yeah.
Yes. Why the fuck are we still doing things with Woody Allen?
Yeah. And Casey Affleck won an Oscar, even though, I mean, he was toxic to women on set. So I think that we see that male privilege is pretty strong. Like, women basically have to make one public mistake. And I'm not trying to trivialize or underplay what Amber Heard did. I mean, abusing your spouse is a big deal, but he also abused her if you look at the evidence. And this will be enough to ruin her. And it's going to, in my opinion, probably be a blip for him if you look at history.
I think it's become already something that's defining her. And, you know, she was somebody whose star was just rising. Like, she didn't have that many roles to her name that she can back up. Now this is going to be the biggest thing. For him, it might be more of a footnote in a few years. And I hate it. Now, another critical take on these events that I'm going to hit you with is the New York Times' Michelle Goldberg, who recently suggested in a great piece that I really recommend that this is the death of Me Too. She describes this as a, quote, misogynist frenzy at work, one characteristic of the deeply reactionary movement we're living through. And I'm with her. It isn't just what's happening to Amber Heard that is exemplary of this situation, I think, but what's happening between Evan Rachel Wood and Marilyn Manson, and between Kanye and Kim Kardashian. We spoke about Evan and Marilyn at length in a prior episode that I encourage you to listen to, but that is a case that is also actively in progress. These two also have fans on each side, and through Evan's efforts to hold Marilyn accountable for his years of abuse throughout the relationship, he continues to evade any semblance of punishment, only recently losing work when other accusers stepped forward. So I'm going to ask you guys the very big question. Is this the end of Me Too? Because, I mean, we still even are glued to the idea of the perfect victim. What's really changed?
That seems to be the defining feature, which is problematic, is that cases where there's multiple victims that step forward with similar stories are being taken seriously. And I think that that's traction that rose with Me Too, and I believe it will continue. But when there's one victim, it's being dismissed. And that's, I think, going to continue to be a battle. So with Weinstein, with Epstein, with all these just disgusting men, there was just so much proof. There were so many women, there was so much proof that like it was just easy to completely remove these men from their work and actually take action. But with Johnny, Marilyn Manson, I think there's like multiple people coming forward as well. So like, I don't understand how this is possibly not being reprimanded, but I think it's going to be a battle of when it's like individuals and when it's like a one-on-one abuse, it will continue to be, I think, difficult for women to come forward and to be believed and to be proven. And that's historically the way it's been. And the biggest progress that we've had is now empowering more and more victims to come forward to the point where you can't ignore it. And that was the power of the Me Too, but it sadly puts the burden on like the need for masses rather than just an individual.
Yeah, extremely good point, Gillian. I also think a lot of these people who are sitting at home and seeing these TikToks probably feel less inclined to step forward if they are abuse victims, because they're seeing the way this woman, who is probably the most prominent example of a female abuse victim right now, is being treated. And that's what worries me in terms of the death of Me Too. The way I see it is that less people might be inclined to come forward. And that's horrible, because we knew that Me Too led to a rise in people coming forward. So what is this going to do? What do you think, Sarah?
I think it will probably have a chilling effect. And I think that that's really upsetting. I think that Me Too had the potential to transform society, and we just weren't ready for it. There was pushback even right away, and there has subsequently been more and more pushback to the point where it's become a bit of a joke. I mean, people saw Men Too trending on Twitter. And what pisses me off about that, the MEN2 hashtag is Me Too was never supposed to be just about women. It was supposed to be about sexual violence and people coming forward. Like Brendan Fraser came forward, right? It was about survivors coming out of the shadows. So it always was inclusive. But people are telling on themselves when they tweet like that, because what they're saying is, I never wanted to believe women. That's the issue, right? I never wanted to believe that there was this much sexual and gendered violence that women were experiencing, or I never wanted to believe it was that bad. Kind of like the Brett Kavanaugh thing, where you kind of got the impression during his testimony that he didn't think what had like he was denying it because in some ways he knew he'd done it and he didn't think it was that bad, right? People want to get away with it. They think it's not that big a deal. Why are you crying? It was just horseplay, or I was having fun. Like, deal with it, get over it. And so Me Too, I felt, was always going to die a death of 1,000 cuts. And I think there have been lots of little moments where it has been, it's been diminished. I think the Brett Kavanaugh trial was part of it, because it showed you could, get away with that and then ascend to the highest court in all the land, because even people who believed Christine Blasey Ford when she testified, Republican senators were coming up with all these conspiracy theories to make it so that, you could believe her, but he was innocent. And people were just twisting themselves in knots to try not to believe the exact accounts of women. And now we're just getting to a point where it's going to be trendy not to believe women, to believe that all women who allege abuse are just liars and we want attention. And we live in a misogynistic society. So I am not surprised. That's my very pessimistic take.
I feel like that last line could be the end of every one of our episodes. We live in a misogynistic society.
The end. That's the moral. That's the moral.
Yeah.
What worries me is the rollout that this has had on TikTok and Instagram, and that if someone were to come forward in the future, the defamation they're going to face from the public for coming out. That's what scares me. Even on a smaller level, if you're a kid in high school and you come out saying something that happened to you, even that has a drastic effect. So that's just what worries me.
The world is going to hell.
I think I'm going to take my daughter and move somewhere really remote. Maybe I'll do one of those SpaceX things and be one of the first on Mars. That sounds pretty good right now.
The Wi-Fi is going to be really bad. The podcast will fail. I can't approve of this.
Elon also concerns me as the one to follow, but I wish you luck.
Yeah, no, maybe that's worse. I'll stay on Earth. Never mind.
I want to go back to Amber's Washington Post op-ed in which she describes it like this, quote, imagine a powerful man as a ship like the Titanic. That ship is a huge enterprise. When it strikes an iceberg, there are a lot of people on board desperate to patch up holes, not because they believe in or even care about the ship, but because their own fates depend on the enterprise. In recent years, the Me Too movement has taught us about how power like this works, not just in Hollywood, but in all kinds of institutions, workplaces, places of worship, or simply in particular communities. In every walk of life, women are confronting these men who are buoyed by social, economic, and cultural power. Amber goes on to say that she believes things are changing, but that was in 2018 and not so long 4 years ago, but also maybe that was when the American president also was facing a litany of assault allegations and has yet to pay for them. She called for many things, including the strengthening of the Violence Against Women Act in the US, and that provides support to abuse victims. The situation is a little different here in Canada, but I also wonder from you guys, what are things you would like to see change, whether that's in Canada, whether that's general? I know for me, I would like to see media literacy be more of a subject in schools. I think it's so important, and I think it's more important than ever.
I 100% agree.
I think, like, why do we have career studies? Half the careers that these kids can have won't exist when they finish high school. So instead of that, just teach them media literacy. And then the world will be a better place, right? I honestly think it should be taught in schools. There are so many useless things that we learn in school. Replace it with media literacy. Great idea, Sadaf.
Thank you, thank you. Also, career studies, what a bullshit class that always was.
Such BS.
Did we need to learn hot cross buns on clarinet, or did we need to learn how to decipher fact from fiction on fucking in the news? Like, 100%. Media literacy, we're big proponents of that. Even on the podcast, are Teaching Me How to Adult, we've spoken a lot about when it comes to elections, when it comes to like serious issues that are being covered on the news, like where's the media bias? Where are you getting your information? How can you actually fact check? Because had it not been for journalism courses, I wouldn't know how to fact check. So how can we expect other people to be doing this? It's a huge problem. So I think that, and I think, going back to what we discussed before, painting more of a picture from a young age to kids in school that like anyone can be a victim. A victim can look like anyone. There isn't one type of person that is a victim. There isn't a good or bad one. And just teaching people that boys, girls, people who identify as neither can all be targets, victims, and abusers. And we need to stop having like pigeonholing people into, a stereotype that we'll have of them based on like who is the most likely to be an abuser versus who isn't.
Yeah. Another thing we talk a lot about on our podcast is educating kids at a young age on how to handle conflict. And I mean, this goes like way back to the whole crux of this trial, identifying how to be in a healthy relationship with someone and deal with issues as they're happening, and understand that, our words shape our world and they have impact on people's lives, and knowing that what you say to someone and how you act to someone can literally cause trauma later on in their lives. So knowing how to have healthy conflict in relationships, I mean, we'd all have a way better world. We got to get that in the education system, Canada. Enough with career studies. Let's go.
Yeah. Well, this brings us to our final segment, Hindsight is 2022, where we choose the one moment that we might have handled differently if we were the subject of this story. So personally, I would like to see fans and anti-fans pick up a book. I said this before, just read. Nobody reads anymore. I want everybody to start reading because I think it makes you a generally smarter person. And also maybe look up what patriarchy means and what abuse is and how systems of abuse operate in just about every part of the world. And if you really want to get deep into this particular trial, that's fine with me. That's okay. That's a good thing. But read all the evidence, listen to the recordings, do it without a little bit of bias. And if you don't know what bias is, look that up too. And if TikTok is your main source of news and info, like we said, find another one, please. What about you guys? What element would you want to change? What would that be for you?
I would have watched the YouTube, like the actual trial earlier on. I was sort of like, oh, do I really want to get into all of this? And was just passively consuming. But then I noticed that what I was consuming was just on TikTok, and it was one-sided. So I wish a little bit earlier I had actually just watched the full clips instead of seeing, the like cocaine nose snort and being like, what the fuck is she doing? But now, like looking back, I'm a little more educated now. And then both of you, thank you very much for helping me see both sides, or, getting a better view on what's actually going on in the history of this trial. So I appreciate this.
Of course. Sarah, what about for you?
So if I were Gen Z, I wouldn't do TikToks about the justice system and trial. I mean, maybe I would about, protests or progressive things. Yeah. But I probably wouldn't weigh in when I'm not like an expert on domestic violence. I just do those fun dances, right? If you don't have anything to add, really, because you're not an expert on domestic violence, you don't need to reenact what you think happened to discredit it. Like,
please no.
Yeah, that's not necessary. Do fun things on TikTok instead.
Go practice a cool transition for 4 hours.
Dance in front of a courthouse. Get your law degree. Take that route.
Absolutely. Go to law school and then rewatch the case.
Show us your chic law clothing transitions.
Yes. Yes. Oh, poor Gen Z.
And with that, we are at the end of this episode. I want to say a massive thank you to the lovely Gillian and Cailyn for dropping by. If you want to hear more from all of us talking about the importance of media literacy, you'll want to listen to their show. Tell us where our listeners can find you both.
You can find us on Instagram at Teach Me How to Adult Podcast. That's where we usually are. We're trying to get more on TikTok, but clearly it's a bit problematic and we haven't nailed the dances or the impressions of court cases. So yeah. Also, Teach Me How to Adult on TikTok and Facebook, and you can follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts. And Cailyn, where are you on Instagram if anyone wants to follow you?
I'm at Cailyn Michaan. A lot of pictures of my baby and my dog, if you're into that kind of thing.
A palate cleanser. That actually is. Cailyn is my palate cleanser, so would advise it. And I'm at Young Gillionaire, which will need to change because I'm officially getting older. So
no, please don't change that.
Rest in peace for that handle.
I also want to say a big thank you, as always, to our amazing producer, Joe Fish. And if you want to hear more from me, you can find me on Twitter at _Sadaf. Sarah, where can our listeners find you?
Listeners can find me at Sarah Sahagian. We also want to add that if any of our listeners are experiencing or have survived intimate partner violence, we encourage you to seek support. In Canada, please call the Domestic Violence Helpline at 1-800-563-0808. If you are in America, please call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 800-799-SAFE, and that's 7233. If you are based anywhere else, you can contact the Violence Prevention Alliance. Remember, you are worthy of being safe. Now, if you like this podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe so other listeners can find us too. Thanks for listening.
Now, since we recorded, a verdict did come through, and we couldn't wrap this episode without talking it through. So here we are. The 6-week trial ended after about 12 hours of deliberation that lasted a few days. Johnny Depp was awarded $10 million in compensatory damages and $5 million in punitive damages over Amber Heard's now infamous Washington Post op-ed from 2018. Now, she also was awarded $2 million in compensatory damages in her countersuit against Johnny Depp. Sarah, what do you make of this end result?
I found it personally upsetting. I think it's going to have a chilling effect on female survivors of domestic violence and non-binary survivors of domestic violence and abuse. I think that there will be a lot of people who won't come forward now after watching such a high-profile case, and not just watching people disbelieve Amber Heard and turn her into cruel memes on TikTok and Instagram, but also this woman is financially ruined. And I think that it's interesting how she was awarded punitive damages. No one is disputing that she was abused. But how do we decide what number reflects what she should get versus what he should get? That's a really complicated thing. And what's interesting is that the person who really doesn't need money, the person for whom paying even, $30 million would be, not life ending, that person is getting more money. And really, is this going to embolden abusers? And that's one thing I'm worried about, that it might embolden men who want to abuse women. And I'm not disputing that there was some mutual abuse going on in this relationship. But clearly, given that they both had some evidence that they had been mistreated, it seems like there is some sexism at work and some double standards that society in general, and perhaps this jury on some sexist level, wanted to punish Amber Heard in a very gendered way.
I completely agree. And here's the other part of it too, though. Johnny is millions of dollars in debt. And that was the thing that he had before even going into this trial. So I do want to point that out because I think, let's not forget, he does have another dog in this fight. And allegedly, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but, they are going to try and appeal this case possibly. And I think, and his team has already made a statement that he doesn't actually need the money. I just don't think that's true. But I'm curious how that will go if Amber does decide to pursue it, because the other part that I keep thinking about, and I agree with you on every count, Sarah, is just the emotional and mental toll that this entire trial has had on her, because just watching her face in those trials each day and just knowing what she's had to deal with, whether she had an audience or not. I mean, I can only imagine what she's dealing with. And if she wants it to just stop here, I can understand that too. But I do agree with you too that the worst part about all of this is that I don't know how the Me Too movement, where does that go from here? We've seen the way that Brad Pitt also now wants to take Angelina Jolie to trial in their ongoing case. So what's going to come of that? And I've seen people on social media, again, also saying Angelina should be taken to trial. And it's scary. There's an uptick in misogyny in the way we are just talking about these things. And from people that I know even who are talking about it and who are thrilled that Amber has lost in this way. I find it so disturbing, even if she is an abuser too. She's also a victim.
She's a victim, and she was a victim who always had less power because she was less connected. I mean, she wasn't really getting roles in Hollywood. Like, listen, her acting ability has nothing to do with this. No one deserves to be abused. I don't think she's a great actress, but that has nothing to do with anything else about this woman. And Johnny Depp, if, listen, his money situation is complicated. That just to me suggests he's bad with money because the man should be richer than God.
The shit that man spends money on, go look it up because it's disturbing.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I have no doubt that he will have money-making opportunities in the future. Yeah. He is not going to be finished in Hollywood. Mel Gibson can still work in Hollywood. He can still get stuff made. Yeah. Hollywood will forgive and embrace Johnny Depp. And clearly he has so many fans, and he thanked his fans in this really crass statement after he essentially won, which is weird because it's kind of acknowledging that this was in some ways a popularity contest. Like, it was just such a tacky move. So even the way he has reacted to winning, to me, reads as gross.
I think so too. And here's the other part of it, because something we talked a lot in this episode about is social media's role in all of this. And of course, his camp has constantly insisted that it has nothing to do with it. And maybe it doesn't, but I think the way that we are talking about it impacts the way we will talk about future cases, as we just said, and the way that we even define abuse and what that is and what an abuser looks like. Here's something that's interesting to me. Johnny Depp joined TikTok right after all of this. And I don't know where his followers stand now, but as we're talking, it's over 8 million. And he did it and he thanked his quote unquote fans for standing by him and his supporters. And I find that a little bit disturbing. And then meanwhile, I do want to read a little bit of the statement that Amber Heard released through her spokesperson, which basically says, quote, as Johnny Depp says he's moving forward, women's rights are moving backward. The verdict's message to victims of domestic violence is be afraid to stand up and speak out. I do just want to say, please don't be afraid if you're listening to this. It's still super important to speak up, and it's still super important to be open about what you're going through and to get help if you can. Don't listen to the naysayers. They're fucking crazy. Do you want to add anything on that point, Sarah?
No, I think everything you said was articulate and perfect and true. And also, let's not give up on Me Too. I mean, Me Too has had a setback, but I refuse to accept that it's over. Let's keep on going and screw all the jerks who think it's funny when women get abused.
Amen. #Me Too.